To understand the sheer, unadulterated scale of the revenge I enacted upon my brother-in-law, you first have to understand the ecosystem in which we operated. The world of high-stakes corporate marketing is not merely about creating pretty pictures or catchy slogans. It is a brutal, bloodthirsty gladiatorial arena where millions of dollars, corporate reputations, and entire careers live or die on the edge of a single, razor-sharp idea. For 10 years, I bled for that arena. By the time I was 32, I had clawed my way up the treacherous corporate ladder to become the marketing director at Apex Communications, one of the most prestigious and ruthless advertising agencies on the Eastern Seaboard. I didn't get there through connections, and I certainly didn't get there through luck. I got there by sacrificing my 20s on the altar of my career. I was the one in the office at 3 in the morning, staring at mood boards until my vision blurred. I was the one analyzing consumer psychological profiles until I could predict market trends before they even materialized. I built my reputation on an unshakable foundation of raw talent, obsessive dedication, and a portfolio that had generated hundreds of millions in revenue for our clients. And then, there was Marcus. Marcus was my sister Chloe's husband, and to call him a parasite would be a profound insult to the evolutionary ingenuity of tapeworms. Marcus was a man who possessed the unearned, breathtaking confidence of someone who had never faced a single consequence in his entire 35 years of existence. He was aggressively mediocre, a man whose entire personality was constructed around expensive golf polos, superficial buzzwords he half-remembered from LinkedIn articles, and an aura of smarmy entitlement. He also happened to be the nephew of Richard Sterling, the senior vice president of Apex Communications. When Marcus decided that his previous career as a freelance life coach wasn't panning out, mostly because people eventually realized he had zero wisdom to impart, he whined to Chloe, who whined to our parents, who ultimately pressured me to put in a good word for him at my agency. I refused. I knew exactly what Marcus was, but it didn't matter. Uncle Richard pulled a few strings, bypassed the entire hiring committee, and suddenly, Marcus was installed as a senior account executive on my floor. From day one, he was a spectacular disaster. He routinely missed deadlines, alienated junior staff with his condescending demeanor, and spent the majority of his working hours browsing luxury car forums or vanishing for 3-hour client lunches that magically never resulted in any actual business. Because he was Richard's nephew, he was utterly untouchable. The HR department treated him like a fragile piece of fine china, and the rest of the management team simply worked around him, quietly reassigning his botched tasks to competent employees to avoid the political fallout of holding him accountable. I tried to ignore him. I built a firewall between my department and his desk, focusing all my energy on the monumental task that had just landed on my desk, the Helios project. Helios was a global consumer electronics conglomerate that was preparing to launch a revolutionary line of smart wearables. They were bleeding market share to their younger, sleeker competitors, and they needed a complete brand overhaul. They were offering a $50 million contract to whichever agency could pitch the most compelling, culturally resonant, and inescapable campaign. It was the white whale of the marketing world, a career-defining account that would cement Apex's dominance for the next decade. I was tasked with leading the pitch. For 4 agonizing, exhilarating months, the Helios project consumed my entire existence. I stopped seeing my friends. I barely saw my apartment. I practically lived in a corner conference room, fueled by a dangerous concoction of black espresso and sheer, manic inspiration. I assembled a tight-knit team of the agency's best creatives, and together, we systematically deconstructed the Helios brand and rebuilt it from the atomic level up. I developed a campaign titled The Human Cadence. It was brilliant, if I do say so myself. It moved away from the cold, clinical tech-spec marketing that plagued the industry and instead focused entirely on the emotional, biometric rhythm of everyday human triumphs. We didn't just have slogans. We had a fully integrated, multi-platform strategy encompassing augmented reality experiences, strategic influencer partnerships that felt organic rather than bought, and a commercial script that I had personally rewritten 17 times until it genuinely brought tears to my eyes. Every single deck, every spreadsheet detailing the massive media buy, every piece of concept art, and every line of copy was my brainchild. It was my magnum opus. Now, this is where my deeply ingrained paranoia comes into play, a paranoia that would ultimately become my salvation. Years ago, early in my career, I had an idea stolen by a senior manager who claimed my brainstorming notes as his own. I swore I would never allow myself to be victimized like that again. So, I developed a rigid, obsessive digital security protocol. I maintained a highly secure, encrypted personal server. Every evening, before I left the office, I would take all the raw files, drafts, Photoshop documents, and strategy PDFs for the Helios project and push them to this server. The server utilized an automated cryptographic hashing protocol. Essentially, the moment a file was uploaded, the system generated a unique digital fingerprint and a verifiable, unalterable legal timestamp, proving exactly when that file existed and in whose possession it was. Furthermore, for the central core concepts and proprietary slogans of the human cadence, I quietly filed expedited copyright registrations out of my own pocket. I told no one about this. In the cutthroat agency world, you don't advertise your armor. As the presentation date for the Helios Executive Board loomed closer, the atmosphere in the office grew electric with tension. We were 1 week out from the internal review, the day I would present the finalized pitch to Uncle Richard and the Apex executive team before we took it to the client. That was when the sabotage occurred. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had been called down to the lobby to deal with a sudden, catastrophic error with a vendor who was printing our physical mock-ups. I was gone from my desk for perhaps 20 minutes. In my haste, utterly exhausted and distracted, I made a fatal mistake. I left my main workstation unlocked, with the Master Helios presentation directory open on the screen. When I returned, the office was quiet. Marcus was lounging by the water cooler, holding a paper cup, wearing that signature, infuriatingly smug grin. He offered a sarcastic little salute as I walked past. I felt a cold prickle of unease at the base of my neck, but I dismissed it. I had a vendor crisis to solve. Thursday arrived. The internal review, the main boardroom was packed. The mahogany table was surrounded by the agency's highest brass, including Uncle Richard, who sat at the head of the table, radiating unearned authority. I stood near the projector, smoothing my skirt, taking a deep breath to center myself. I had my flash drive in my hand. I was ready to unveil a masterpiece. Before I could plug my drive into the console, Marcus suddenly stood up from his chair near his uncle. "Actually, Eleanor," Marcus said, his voice dripping with faux professionalism, "I'd like to take the floor first, if you don't mind. I've been doing a lot of deep-dive strategic thinking over the last few months, working off hours, and I've put together a comprehensive pitch for the Helios account that I think is going to blow everyone away." I blinked, momentarily paralyzed by confusion. "Marcus, what are you talking about? You aren't even on the Helios strategy team." Uncle Richard held up a hand, his heavy rings clinking against the table. "Now, Eleanor, let's foster an environment of collaboration. Marcus has shown incredible initiative lately. Let the boy present. We can look at your materials afterward." A sickening sensation began to pool in my stomach, a dark, heavy dread. I stepped back. Marcus walked to the console, plugged in a sleek silver drive and clicked the remote. The massive screen illuminated. The title slide appeared in bold, elegant typography, Helios, the human cadence. My breath caught in my throat. I felt all the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and lightheaded. For the next 45 minutes, I stood frozen in the corner of the room, trapped in a waking nightmare, as Marcus systematically presented my entire campaign. He didn't just steal the broad strokes, he had copied the entire master file. He presented my mood boards. He read my proprietary copy. He unveiled the augmented reality strategy that I had spent weeks refining with our tech leads. He even used the exact same vocal inflections and dramatic pauses I had been practicing in front of my mirror at home. He was incredibly clumsy with the material, of course. If you knew the project intimately, You could tell he didn't understand the underlying psychology of the metrics he was quoting. He stumbled over the technical jargon, but the sheer brilliance of the work shone through his mediocre delivery. The executives were spellbound. They murmured in appreciation, nodding vigorously. Uncle Richard was practically glowing with paternal pride, leaning back in his leather chair and beaming at his nephew. "Brilliant," Richard declared when Marcus finally clicked to the final slide. "Absolutely phenomenal work, Marcus. This is innovative. This is exactly the fresh, disruptive thinking Apex needs. I knew you had it in you." The room erupted into applause. The shock finally wore off, replaced by a blinding, white-hot fury. I stepped forward, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the applause. "That is my work." The room fell dead silent. Every head turned toward me. "Excuse me?" Marcus asked, adopting a look of wounded innocence that was so perfectly practiced, I almost wanted to applaud him for the sheer sociopathy of it. "Every single slide, every concept, every word of that presentation is mine," I said, my voice hardening, echoing off the glass walls. "I have spent 4 months building this campaign. You copied my files from my workstation on Tuesday while I was in the lobby." Uncle Richard's face darkened, a scowl pulling down the corners of his mouth. "Eleanor, that is an incredibly serious accusation. And frankly, it sounds like sour grapes." "It is not an accusation, Richard, it is a fact," I snapped, dropping all pretense of corporate deference. "Ask him to explain the algorithmic targeting matrix on slide 24. Ask him to break down the demographic psychographics that inform the color palette. He can't, because he didn't write it." Marcus let out a patronizing little sigh, shaking his head. "Look, Eleanor, I know you've been struggling lately. You've been stressed, you've been missing internal benchmarks. I honestly didn't want to bring this up, but I had to step in and take over the heavy lifting because your initial concepts just weren't hitting the mark. I used a few of your baseline graphics, sure, but the strategic vision, the human cadence concept, that was all me." "You lying piece of—" "Enough," Richard slammed his hand on the table. The sharp crack echoed through the room. "Eleanor, your behavior is entirely unprofessional and frankly, unhinged. You have been showing signs of severe burnout for weeks, and now you are attempting to sabotage a colleague's success out of petty jealousy. We will discuss this in HR immediately. The rest of you dismissed. Marcus, excellent job. We take this to Helios next week." I was ushered into the Human Resources office like a criminal. The HR director, a woman whose entire job consisted of protecting executive liabilities, didn't even pretend to listen to my side of the story. The narrative had already been decided. Marcus was the rising star who had saved the Helios project. I was the burned-out, toxic, hysterical woman who was trying to steal his glory. Given the severity of your insubordination, the aggressive nature of your outburst in front of the executive board, and a documented recent drop in your collaborative productivity, the HR director recited, reading from a pre-printed form, "Apex Communications is terminating your employment, effective immediately. You will be provided 2 weeks of severance. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items." I didn't cry, I didn't yell. The fury inside me had condensed from a blazing fire into something cold, dense, and infinitely more dangerous. I calmly signed the severance paperwork, knowing it legally bound me to nothing regarding intellectual property disputes, packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box, and allowed the burly security guard to walk me out through the glass doors of the agency I had practically helped build. The worst part, however, was not losing my job. It was the absolute, crushing betrayal of my own family. The moment I got home, I called my sister Chloe. I expected her to be shocked. I expected her to yell at Marcus. I expected loyalty. Instead, I was met with a wall of aggressive defensiveness. "Marcus already called me," Chloe said, her voice dripping with irritation before I could even explain the details. "Eleanor, I cannot believe you did that to him. He has been working so incredibly hard on this project. He barely sleeps. And for you to stand up in front of his boss, his uncle, and try to humiliate him and steal his credit? It's pathetic." "Chloe, he stole my files," I pleaded, desperately trying to make her understand. "I have the proof. I built that entire campaign from nothing." "Stop it, Elle," she snapped. "Just stop. You have always been jealous of Marcus. You've always looked down on him because he didn't go to some fancy Ivy League school like you. You can't stand the fact that he's finally succeeding and you're hitting a wall. Mom and Dad are devastated by how you're acting. My stomach plummeted. You talked to Mom and Dad. Of course I did, and they agree with me. You need therapy, Alina. You need to figure out why you are so deeply bitter and toxic. Don't call us until you're ready to apologize to Marcus. She hung up. I sat on the edge of my sofa, staring at the blank screen of my phone. My career was gone. My reputation at Apex was destroyed. My family had entirely abandoned me, completely brainwashed by a sociopathic grifter simply because it was easier to believe the lie than confront the ugly truth about the man Chloe had married. They thought I was broken. They thought I was a jealous, toxic loser who had finally been put in her place. They had absolutely no idea what they had just unleashed. I didn't spend the weekend crying into a pint of ice cream. I spent the weekend going to war. I booted up my encrypted personal server. I pulled up the cryptographic hash logs. There it was, hundreds of files, meticulously timestamped, dating back 4 months. Every single draft, every script, every asset of the human cadence. I had irrefutable, court-admissible digital proof that I was the sole author and creator of the intellectual property that Apex Communications was planning to sell to Helios. I also pulled up the legal copyright certificates issued by the government, explicitly naming me as the owner of the core slogans and structural concepts. Then, I did some research. Apex Communications' biggest, most vicious rival was a titan of an agency named Zenith Media. Zenith and Apex hated each other with the burning intensity of 1,000 suns. They constantly poached each other's clients, poached each other's talent, and undercut each other in the press. Zenith was currently aggressively courting a massive account, Aegis Technologies, Helios's primary, direct competitor in the wearable tech space. Aegis was wealthier than Helios, hungrier than Helios, and desperate to crush them. First thing Monday morning, I didn't send a resume to Zenith Media. I didn't apply online. I utilized a contact I had made years ago, a headhunter who owed me a massive favor, and forced an emergency, off-the-books meeting directly with Victoria Vance, the terrifyingly brilliant, cutthroat CEO of Zenith Media. I walked into Zenith's ultra-modern, glass and steel headquarters wearing my sharpest suit, carrying a titanium briefcase containing a locked tablet. Victoria Vance was a woman who didn't waste time on pleasantries. You have exactly 5 minutes to tell me why the recently fired, allegedly unstable marketing director of my biggest rival is sitting in my office, she said, not looking up from her monitors. Because, Victoria, I said, sitting down without being asked, Apex is going to pitch a $50 million campaign to Helios next Thursday. And I am here to hand you the exact weapon you need to blow them out of the water, humiliate them globally, and secure the Aegis Technologies account in one sweeping motion. That got her attention. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. I'm listening. I unlocked the tablet and slid it across her vast desk. For the next hour, I didn't just pitch her the human cadence. I pitched her the upgraded, unrestrained version of it. I walked her through the psychology, the metrics, the viral potential. I showed her the exact media buy strategy Apex was going to recommend. This is phenomenal, Victoria murmured, scrolling through the interactive mock-ups. This is easily a Cannes Lions contender. But why are you giving it to me? If you pitched this at Apex, why did they fire you? I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Because my brother-in-law stole it, claimed it as his own, and got me fired when I confronted him. The agency leadership covered for him. Victoria leaned back, analyzing me like a chess opponent. If he stole it and they pitch it to Helios, we can't use it. It's tainted. It'll be a legal bloodbath over IP ownership. That, I said, pulling a thick, bound dossier from my briefcase and placing it gently on her desk, is where you are wrong. I opened the dossier. Inside were the certified server logs, the cryptographic hash keys, the IP tracking data, and the government-issued copyright registrations. I legally own every single pixel and syllable of this campaign, I explained, my voice perfectly calm. Apex does not own it. They have no legal right to sell it. They don't even know I have these timestamps. I am granting Zenith Media exclusive licensing rights to this intellectual property, on the condition that we adapt it for Aegis Technologies and we launch it aggressively. And I mean aggressively. Victoria's eyes scanned the legal documents. She was a shark who had just smelled a gallon of fresh blood in the water. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. You don't just want a job, Eleanor. You want absolute annihilation. I want them ground into dust, I confirmed. Victoria closed the dossier. Welcome to Zenith Media, Eleanor. You are our new Vice President of Global Strategy. You have a $10 million emergency production budget. I want this campaign retrofitted for Aegis Technologies, and I want a massive, unavoidable media blitz launched. When do we strike? Apex pitches to Helios next Thursday, I said, doing the mental math. If they win the contract, they'll likely announce the partnership and tease the campaign the following Tuesday. We launched the Aegis campaign globally on Monday, one day before them. The next 3 weeks were a blur of adrenaline, caffeine, and vengeance. Zenith Media was a well-oiled machine, and with my intimate knowledge of the campaign and Victoria's blank checkbook, we moved at light speed. We rebranded the Human Cadence to fit Aegis Technologies' product line, enhancing the visuals, securing A-list voiceover talent, and buying up premium ad space across every major digital and physical platform. Times Square billboards, Super Bowl-tier YouTube placements, primetime television slots. We kept it entirely under wraps, total operational secrecy. Meanwhile, my family continued their campaign of psychological warfare. I received a barrage of texts from Chloe and my parents. Chloe, Marcus is so stressed about the Helios pitch. You owe him an apology for trying to ruin his confidence. You are tearing this family apart. Mom. Eleanor, please seek help. Your father and I are so disappointed in your behavior. I didn't reply to a single one. I simply took screenshots and saved them in a folder labeled Motivation. Then came Thursday. The day Marcus and Apex pitched to Helios. Through Zenith's industry spies, we heard the pitch was a massive success. Helios loved the campaign. They signed a preliminary contract with Apex worth over $60 million. Apex announced a press conference for the following Tuesday to officially unveil their new partnership and tease the revolutionary Human Cadence campaign. Monday morning arrived. The trap was set. At exactly 9:00 a.m. EST, Zenith Media pulled the trigger. The Aegis Technologies campaign went live. It was an apocalyptic marketing event. You couldn't open a social media app, turn on a television, or walk down a major city street without seeing our campaign. The central messaging, the emotional core, the exact visual aesthetic that Marcus thought he had stolen, it was everywhere, seamlessly integrated with the Aegis brand. It was a masterpiece of modern advertising, and the public response was instantaneous and overwhelmingly positive. Aegis's stock jumped 4% by noon. I sat in my corner office at Zenith, sipping a very expensive cappuccino, watching the analytics dashboard light up like a Christmas tree. Then, I waited for the fallout. It didn't take long. By 2:00 p.m., the industry press had caught wind of the Aegis launch. By 4:00 p.m., panic must have been setting in at Apex. They had just sold a $60 million campaign to Helios, a campaign that was currently plastered across the globe by their client's biggest rival. Tuesday morning, the day of Apex's grand press conference, was an unmitigated disaster for them. Helios executives had seen the Aegis campaign. They immediately realized that the brilliant, proprietary strategy Apex had sold them was completely compromised. It looked identical to the Aegis launch. To the public, if Helios launched the Human Cadence now, they would look like cheap, pathetic copycats plagiarizing their rival. Helios canceled the press conference. And then, they unleashed their lawyers. Helios demanded an immediate, forensic explanation from Apex Communications as to how their highly confidential, proprietary pitch was currently airing globally for Aegis. This is when the dominoes truly began to fall, and they fell with catastrophic force. Apex, terrified of losing a $60 million client and facing a massive lawsuit, launched an immediate internal investigation. They audited Marcus, they interrogated his team, and because Marcus was fundamentally incompetent, his lies unraveled in hours. He couldn't provide a single piece of source material. He had no early drafts, no search history for the concepts, no correspondence regarding the development of the ideas. All he had was the final presentation file he had stolen from me. And then, Victoria Vance delivered the kill shot. Zenith's legal team formally contacted Apex Communications and the Helios Executive Board. We provided them with my airtight, legally binding cryptographic server timestamps and the federal copyright registrations, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the intellectual property belonged entirely to me, and by extension of my new employment, to Zenith Media. The documentation proved that Marcus had not only plagiarized the campaign, but that Apex Communications had attempted to commit massive corporate fraud by selling stolen, copyrighted intellectual property to a global conglomerate. The explosion was biblical. Helios immediately terminated their contract with Apex, but they didn't stop there. Furious at the public embarrassment and the waste of their time, Helios filed a devastating, multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Apex Communications for breach of contract, fraudulent misrepresentation, and gross negligence. The fallout within Apex was swift and brutal. The board of directors panicked. They needed a scapegoat, and they needed one immediately. Marcus wasn't just fired, he was publicly immolated. He was escorted out of the building by security, screaming and crying, while his colleagues watched in disgust. The industry trade publications got hold of the story, likely leaked by Victoria, though I never asked, and Marcus's name and face were plastered across every marketing blog and newsletter as the ultimate cautionary tale of nepotism and intellectual theft. He was instantly, permanently blacklisted from the entire advertising industry. No agency in the world would ever hire him to so much as fetch coffee. Uncle Richard didn't survive the blast radius either. The board found him complicit in protecting Marcus and overriding HR protocols. He was forced into an early, highly disgraceful retirement, his reputation completely in tatters. Apex Communications' stock tanked, and they lost 3 other major clients who no longer trusted their integrity. As for my family, the realization of what had actually happened hit them like a freight train. My phone began to ring incessantly. It was Chloe, then my mother, then my father, dozens of missed calls, hundreds of text messages. Chloe, please pick up, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Marcus lied to me. He lied to all of us. He's facing legal trouble and we have no money. Please, we need to talk. Mom, Eleanor, honey, we are so devastated. We were so wrong. Please forgive us. We want to see you. I read the messages sitting in my plush, leather chair in my VP office at Zenith. I looked at the framed copy of the Aegis campaign poster on my wall. I felt a profound, absolute sense of peace. I didn't block their numbers. I simply muted them. Let them sit in the silence of their own guilt. Let them realize that their blind loyalty to a charismatic parasite had cost them their daughter and their sister. They had made their choice when I needed them most, and now they had to live with the consequences of that choice. 6 months later, I walked across the stage at the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, wearing a custom designer gown. The applause was deafening as I accepted the Grand Prix award for the Aegis Technologies campaign. I stood at the podium, holding the heavy, golden trophy, looking out at the sea of the most powerful people in my industry. I didn't mention Marcus. I didn't mention Apex. They were beneath my notice, relegated to the ash heap of my history. I simply thanked my brilliant team at Zenith Media and dedicated the award to anyone who had ever been told that their hard work didn't matter. I had survived the fire, and I had emerged not just unbroken, but untouchable.